Right, hopefully my internet connection is stable and this records okay. This is foliage of the Alder tree, and today we transition from the rowan tree to the 18 degrees of the Alder tree, which will take us up to the 21st of February when we go into the willow tree. So today, technically speaking, is the actual midpoint between winter solstice and spring equinox. So it's the cross-quarter festival of Imbolc. Now, I'm going to explain some of the star lore briefly because it actually relates to some of the medicine lore, which is quite interesting. But firstly, there's about 35 species of the Alder. Specifically for the British Isles, we're looking at what we call European Alder or black Alder or just common Alder. Its Latin name is Ulmus glutinosa. And there's, like I say, there's 35 different species. There's even a red Alder, which is edible. You can eat its catkins and stuff, but that's not the Celtic native British Isles alder tree. So for the British Isles, it was black alder or common alder. So, and every part of the tree can be used medicinally. So the bark, the leaves, and its cones. Now, what's unique about the alder tree, there's quite a few unique things about it, really. Probably the most unusual is that it's a waterproof wood. You know, one of the Bryatheroums is milk container, and it actually if you put the alder wood into water or milk or any liquid, it goes hard, it hardens. So it's waterproof and it hardens. So in Norse countries, they actually made boats out of alder wood, and the town of Venice is built on alder logs, and clogs are famously made of alder wood. And yeah. Now, other than the waterproof thing, which I'll come back to, it self-pollinates. It's a hermaphrodite, you know, so these catkins that you can see, the long dangly ones are the male catkins, and the round ones are the female catkins. So it pollinates itself. And for medicine-wise, the special one is the female catkin. In the autumn, it goes from green to dark brown, and it stays attached to the tree, and those catkins become very hard and woody. So they look like tiny pine cones, and they're a brilliant source of some of the medicine we're looking at. But this is them in their green state. So, so one of my photos, just let someone in. This is the Imbolc portal. So you've got the rowan tree on the left and the alder tree on the right. So this is the actual moment, if you like. And this was actually photographed in Glastonbury Abbey many years ago at this very time, just to show that the snowdrops are present as well. Now, oops. PowerPoint's frozen. Right, okay. This shows the 4 cross-quarter festivals, and we're at Imbolc, which is 15 degrees Aquarius. I'll show that in a minute as well. But they're the 4 cross-quarter festivals. They're the midpoints between winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, and autumn equinox. So it's an 8th division of the year. And the actual fire festivals are between 2 trees. So the Imbolc moment is between rowan and alder, and Beltane is between oak and holly, and so on, which you can see in this wheel. I'm not saying the Celts used the common zodiac although I would say that the bards did. Like, I see that I'm talking about Iron Age Celts as opposed to medieval bards. So when you get to medieval bardic lore of Ireland and Wales, they did know the zodiac, but the Iron Age Celts may not have. However, they were fully aware of solstices and equinoxes. So if you know when the solstices and equinoxes are, you know the midpoints. That goes without saying. So that the zodiac is just a way of measuring the year in that way, you know. So for the Imbolc moment, can say it's the 15th degree of Aquarius, is just a zodiacal way of saying it's the midpoint between winter solstice and spring equinox. It just allows you to divide the wheel of the year into more precise moments rather than just 4 moments, solstices and equinoxes. But from that kind of star lore, and when that drifts into the medieval times of inherited zodiacal lore and mystery traditions, it seems to be present in the Ogham Grove, as we've spent a year or more now going around the year of the wheel and learning different star lore patterns that are very synchronistic, at the very least, to the trees and the tree lore. So where we are at the moment, then, we're in the first ACMA, which is the rising energy, rising from winter solstice, rising up to spring equinox with the ash tree, which is on the left-hand side here. So if you see the yew tree at the bottom, then the birch, and then rowan and alder, that's that midpoint corresponding with Imbolc. And the alder tree takes us into what I'm calling a mystery pattern that I've nicknamed the water's edge. And this is that of all the 20 trees in the Ogham, alder and willow have been placed side by side by the medieval tree list. That's quite interesting because it kind of balances heather and gorse. Heather and gorse, of all the 20 trees, are the only 2 that relate to wild heathland. So I called it the wild heath. So with the descent into the underworld, there's this kind of heather and gorse wild heath landscape. And then with the rising after the winter solstice, we're taken to the water's edge. And there's going to be salmon of wisdom lore and the rising, a famous thing called the salmon's leap, which will take us into Aries and the spring equinox and stuff. So Alder, was being the second herald of Imbolc, is also going to take us into Pisces. It's going to take us from Aquarius, the water pourer. So it's a watery, even though Aquarius is an air sign, it's pouring the waters in the night sky, in the heavens. It's pouring this water. Next to Pisces, the fish, you know, and even Capricorn is a watery sign because it's actually a goat with a fish's tail. So this part of the night sky is a fish-tailed goat, a water pourer, and a couple of fish. It's the wet, watery area of the stars, if you like. So that's interesting. Alder has these Pisces connections as well, which I'm going to come to. So this diagram is based on the, for want of a better word, chakra system from Hadrian's Wall, celebrated by the Mithraic worshippers of the Roman legionaries. But it gave us a planetary chakra system, which relates to the 3 cauldrons. And we can look at that on other videos. But at the bottom, Aquarius going into Pisces is Alder, the Alder tree. And it corresponds with the lower cauldron and the salmon of wisdom in the cauldron of Anuin, and so on. You know, the lower cauldron is driven by Sagittarius, the fire sign, which is also there in the lower realm. You know, it's the thighs. So, where are we? since very ancient times. I think it goes back at least 2,000 years to ancient Alexandria and stuff. You know, there's this concept of the zodiac man or person, in which the 12 signs of the zodiac relate to different parts of the human anatomy. So Aries governs the head, and Leo governs the heart, and Sagittarius governs the thighs, and so on. Now, what's really interesting with Alder is its relationship with Pisces, and you'll see here at the bottom, Pisces governs the feet. You know, there's a fish on each foot here, you know, and that's going to be quite relevant, and it's relevant to Ceridwen gathering herbs according to planetary hours, and also to people like Nicholas Culpeper saying, oh, this is influenced by Venus or Saturn or Jupiter or Capricorn or Aries and stuff. So that they were thinking of the heavens and the zodiac and planets being relevant to the medicine that people needed for different ailments. So this is something we'll probably come back to, this zodiac anatomy of the human body. But for now, for the Alder tree, Pisces the fish, the salmon weir, the water's edge. So we've seen Nicholas Culpeper a couple of videos ago with the birch tree. He's quite brilliantly funny. He actually didn't live very long. Look, 1616 to 54, so he died quite young. And reading his mentions of various trees in the Ogham, he's quite a character. So with the Alder tree, he considers it so common and well known that he's not even going to bother describing it. And these are his words. It really amused me. He says, this tree grows to a reasonable height and spreads much if it likes a place. It is so generally known to ordinary people that I conceive it needless to tell what is no news. Quite funny. But here's an intriguing thing then. He says, it is a tree under the dominion of Venus and of some watery sign or other, I suppose Pisces. That's quite amazing. Whereas Alder corresponds with Pisces in the Ogham Grove, you know? And therefore the decoction or distilled water of the leaves is excellent against burnings and inflammation. Now, we've already just seen with the zodiac man how Pisces corresponds with the feet. And another quote at the bottom, the leaves put under the bare feet, galled with traveling, are a great refreshing to them. So that the Alder leaves refresh tired feet, blistered feet, worn out feet from galled from traveling. So the Alder leaf then is a medicine in itself, and I'll talk a bit more about the medicine in a minute, but you can use the bark of the Alder tree and the leaf of the Alder tree, as well as the catkins, and you can make a tea or a decoction. Now, it's not recommended as a herbal tea like chamomile or mint or something. It's not a tea you should drink a lot of. Too much of it is going to make you throw up. However, a small amount for the right circumstances is the medicine. It's just not, it's not a leisure drinking tea. You know, it's a medicine that should be respected, and its benefits are quite huge. You know, it stops internal bleeding. It's astringent, and will stop the internal bleeding and things. Shoving the Alder leaves into your shoes to refresh aching feet, fascinating in itself. And of course in Holland, the Dutch people made wooden clogs, and the favored wood for clogs is Alder, again because it's waterproof, you know, which is perfect for a shoe, of course. And along with the leaves that you could shove inside, the wood itself is antibacterial, antifungal, you know, and fascinating, you know, that you actually got footwear of medicinal value as well. The leaves, women with breast discomfort, breast pain, can use the leaves to take the pain away when they're nursing their babies as well. There's something in it that is apart from the astringent thing and the stopping of the bleeding, it closes the pores and it desensitizes things, so it can take the pain and discomfort away as well. Now, these are the female cones in the autumn time when they've turned woody and hard, and they will stay on the tree. They don't fall off, so it's quite easy to identify an alder tree when all of its leaves have fallen, because these tiny little clusters of pine cones are there, the alder cones, which technically are female catkins. They're last year's catkins sort of thing. But these are the super medicine, if you like. Then again, it's not a food medicine, it's mainly used externally for things. Now, a curious thing then to do with Pisces fish and feet again is you can make a decoction of these cones just by boiling water with them, or putting a boiling water on them and leaving it for 10 minutes, and they're antifungal. You know, the liquid produced will be antifungal, and so you can actually use it for things like athlete's foot. You know, you could bathe your feet in alder cone water, and it's going to soothe your feet and start healing any fungal problems in your feet. It's quite interesting. Another thing too is that I only learned this by Googling recently, but this, as well as being antifungal, there's something in the cones that reduces the pH of water. So people with exotic fish and aquariums will actually use alder cones in kind of perforated bags, like a big tea bag, and put it in their aquarium, and it will reduce the pH. So the alder cones, as well as being antifungal, it helps fish. You know, it's healing fish and helping fish, as well as healing the feet. It's really quite interesting, these kind of fishy feet things with the alder tree. What's my thing? So it's astringent. It reduces fever. So again, it's not a leisure tea like mint or chamomile. You don't drink lots of it, but a little bit of it will help reduce a fever. It stops internal bleeding. A little bit is a good general tonic. A decoction of the bark can be used for swellings of limbs and inflammation and rheumatism, but that's an external kind of compress rather than drinking it. Yeah, and you can also make a tea with the bark and leaves and gargle with it, and not to drink it too much, but gargling with alder bark tea and its leaves is going to be good for mouth ulcers. So it helps to fix mouth ulcer problems just by gargling the tea. So again, it's not really a leisure tea. You're not drinking it, but a little bit will help stop internal bleeding. It's antibacterial, antiviral, and yeah, fascinating. So the zodiac things with the Pisces, the fish, and the feet, I thought was great fun, you know, because that's kind of, and Nicholas Culpeper almost guessing really that some watery sign, Pisces, is what it would relate to. Very funny. Unlike the birch tree, I couldn't find any medicinal value to the fungi related to the alder tree. It does have a polypore, like, you know, the birch tree polypore was very beneficial. But the Alder tree polypore, which is often just called an Alder bracket, doesn't seem to have any medicinal values. I haven't been able to find any anyway. So doesn't mean it doesn't have, but I couldn't find any. So maybe research is still being done, or it'd be unusual that it would be there and not have some of the qualities of the tree itself, you know, like the birch polypore does. But yeah, bit of a blank canvas with that one. So the Alder tree is famous in Welsh mythology from a story in the Mabinogion called Branwen. And it's branch 2 of the Mabinogion. And it's a rather tragic story. And my inclination is, having done this book we did last year, volume 3 of Voices of the Grove, was dedicated to the story of Bran and his sister Branwen. And it's an epic tragedy, you know. All of the main characters in it die, and it's quite horrible as a story. So, I mean, what does the Alder tree give us with that then? You know, it's, first of all, the god Bran is identified by another god, Gwydion, in the famous Battle of the Trees by the Alder branches on his shield. It's like the Alder tree is the heraldic motif of Bran and Branwen. And in their story, Branwen has a son, and his name is Gwern, and Gwern means Alder tree. So Bran is identified by the Alder branches on his shield, and Branwen's son is called Alder. You know, so it's a fascinating thing. Now, this is a lovely piece of artwork by a group member called Ina Whistler, and she illustrated many aspects of the story from branch 2. You know, there's Bran wading through the Irish Sea and the ships, and Branwen means white raven, and Bran is a dark raven, and so on. But what tragically happens amongst it all is Branwen's son, Gwern, as a young lad, is thrown into a fire and killed. And that causes a monstrous war between the Britons and the Irish. Everyone dies, pretty much, apart from 7, you know. And the god Bran himself is mortally wounded, and he tells his 7 survivors to chop his head off and take it to the White Mound in London, where the Tower of London is, and he'll protect the land whilst he's dead. Now, we'll talk about some of these ideas further on, but and Branwen herself, after the war, dies of grief. She dies of a broken heart because of all the people that have died that she knew, her son, her brother, all the men of Britain, all the people of Ireland. She can't stand any of it. So what I got out of the whole thing was that Branwen, as a goddess archetype, for me, represents the, almost like a Kuan Yin in China, you know, that she represents utter compassion. You know, if you're an alcoholic, you need an ex-alcoholic to help you through it. If you've been raped, you need someone who's been raped to help you through it, because they're the only people that can have empathy with the trauma that you've experienced. And so Branwen is almost that. She is a Venus goddess, but she's had such a massively traumatic saga that she is going to be the goddess of compassion to all deep traumas. You know, no one's had deeper trauma than her. You know, all her loved ones killed, and she herself dying of a broken heart, you know. So with utter grief, Branwen, I think, is the perfect goddess to go to for that deep healing, you know, healing of deep trauma. Alder too, famously in the Ogham and in the Battle of the Trees, which is a Welsh poem credited to Taliesin, is the wood of shields. Again, like the clogs and the boats and Venice, it's waterproof. So in a very damp country like the British Isles, having a waterproof wood for your shield is wonderful, because there's not going to be any problem with damp or mold or rot, you know. So it's the perfect, reliable wood for protecting yourself. So approaching Alder for more, which was psychological well-being, maybe post-traumatic stress disorder isn't even powerful enough, you know, real deep trauma. Alder has this kind of figurehead of Branwen, goddess of mercy and compassion, and also it's the Bran is the shield, it's protective, you know, and it protects and it heals. They were the thoughts that I had with that, and we can talk about that. I know Franklin will expand on his article in volume 3. So there wasn't really any fungi to go with the Alder tree that I could find, and thinking of Ceridwen again and the gathering of flowers and herbs according to the planetary hours and books of astrology. So what plants are flowering now, you know? So we've had snowdrops already for the rowan tree, and almost the next flower to bloom, and you know, in maybe within the next few weeks, will be the primrose. Now the primrose is a lovely wild flower in the British Isles, and it's not to be confused with evening primrose, which is a different plant entirely. And that was a bit frustrating when I was Googling, looking for herbal knowledge and flower essences about the primrose. Evening primrose kept popping up all the time, so you have to wade through all the evening primrose to find primrose. Latin name Primula vulgaris, you know, it's a different plant to the evening primrose. So primrose comes from the Latin meaning prime, as in the first. So apart from snowdrops, which I think were actually might have been brought here by the Romans, I'm not sure, but the primrose means prime rose, or the first rose, the first flower, the first flora. So although snowdrop is the first to appear in the British Isles now, primrose, its name literally means first flower. And so it coming straight after the snowdrop with the rowan tree, tree is right. It's completely edible. You can add it to your salad bowl. You can eat the flowers and the leaves as well. Health-wise, it's good for headaches and colds, and it also helps with insomnia. It has a slight sedative quality to it. And the root of the primrose flower is used for serious coughs, you know, bronchial coughs and stuff, chesty coughs. And it's also meant to help with arthritis as well. Now, one thing I just remembered before I finish was the bark of the alder tree is also antiviral. And this is only modern because it's just the last few years, but I did find one site saying that China at the moment are looking at alder bark and its antiviral qualities as a way of working with COVID and coronaviruses. So that's quite interesting, how much we need the trees, you know, in that way. So anyway, that's my little presentation. I'll keep recording and we can talk about some of those ideas for a while. So you can put your microphones back on.
you. So I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
You were talking about how the alder bark is antiviral, and one of the combinations I use for Astragalus, usnea, and one other, I can't remember. Do you think that alder could be mixed with Astragalus and usnea? I mean, I don't know. Go ahead.
No, that's really interesting. And I think as we're going round the year, looking at things as individual medicines, but how you would combine 2, 3, or 4 together, I don't have that knowledge, but obviously it's something that you could do, isn't it? You just have to, would they empower each other or would they negate each other? Yeah, I don't have that knowledge, but it's fascinating.
Okay.
I was reading about parsley, and parsley is high in vitamin C and iron. And a lot of people with iron deficiency may actually be lacking in vitamin C, because you need vitamin C to absorb iron. You know, so if you might be taking iron supplements, but if you're lacking vitamin C, it's just going to pass through you. You're not going to get it. So parsley is unique in that way, where it has both the vitamin C and the iron. But it's interesting. It's just an example of how sometimes you need one vitamin to get the benefits of another mineral, you know. So the idea of combining plants has to be there, doesn't it? But I just don't have that knowledge yet.
Thanks.
Yuri, what was the type of fungi that I couldn't hear you for the alder tree? Was that turkey
No, so there's,
or you dropped out for me during that.
Okay, turkey tail is a very important fungi, and I think we will cover it. Turkey tail is very important, and we will talk about it sometime, but it wasn't unique to the alder tree. So the mushroom, the fungi I showed was the alder bracket, which is unique to the alder tree. It looks a bit like turkey tail, but it's not a turkey tail. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, Yuri, you were breaking up a lot, so you might want to go back and re-record this yourself on Zoom, because if you just publish this, a lot of it dropped out.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's really sad, but no, I'll do that. If it's that bad, I'll do that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Frustrating.
Check it out. You'll have to decide.
Yeah.
You might have 60% that's there, but there's probably, 35, 40% we were just not hearing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Franklin, do you want to talk?
A couple of interesting, things that, well, the first thing that came up is Culpepper's, thinking about Venus. Venus is exalted in Pisces, astrologically.
Yes.
Venus is exalted in Pisces. In my article, I made the case that to crossing the horizon, they see him on the horizon crossing the sea. This can be compared to an astrological chart where the horizontal axis is the axis of relationship, between the self and the other. And so it's all about relationship. And Branwen is the daughter of Lear, who is the god of the sea, or the lord of the sea. And so the daughter of the sea is traditionally Aphrodite or Venus, who is born out of the sea. So Branwen is a Venus figure as the daughter of the sea. But the story opens that her father is missing. So right from the beginning, we've got a situation in things are not, there are consequences. So when the goddess of love, emerges in a constellation that's imbalanced, we're going to find consequences in the story. One of the consequences, she has 4 brothers, and 2 of them are half brothers, maybe step brothers. One of them is called Nyson. He's a normal guy. They say nothing about him. But F. Nyson is a deranged sadist, and he's the one who causes all the trouble. So I think this is, a point that has to do with trauma, but I'm not going to get into that. Merged in an ocean also strikes me as an image and metaphor of trauma, that we're trying to get through somewhere, and or to communicate to we're half drowning, we're underwater in an unconscious state. All that we see is the eyes and the nose coming. And so, it's an interesting image for
Would
a
that
trauma
also be
situation.
submerged in emotions, looking at it with a Jungian, from a Jungian viewpoint?
No,
I'm sorry.
you're right. I mean, that's
interrupting.
exactly what would be traumatized, would be the emotional body. So yes, the sea would be the water, the emotions, and being submerged in it is what happens in trauma is the emotional body gets overwhelmed and you get stuck in a state. And then they think it's a forest crossing the sea. So this, and let me just say that these are just using images to talk psychologically. This is mythopoetry. This is not like a fixed, definite analysis, but the images lend themselves to think psychologically about what might be. The Irish in an oracle, she's connected to be able to interpret dreams and things like that. So they ask her, what's going on? Well, there's a forest coming across the ocean. What is this? And she says, this is my brother. He's coming to save me. So psychologically, what strikes me is that the forest is nature, and it's the Ogham grove. These are symbols that contain wisdom, and they were invented to maybe it was because the Greeks were invading and the Irish needed to start communicating and didn't want the Greeks to know what they were talking about. Whatever the case may be, it's a secret language that the initiated can speak. So here comes a forest crossing the sea, images of nature. And in terms of trauma, this is something that nature can do. Relationships with trees and things that are, just inherently kindnesses. There's a real altruism in nature. Trees are sentient, altruistic. The trees built the soil that contains the countless generations that have come before, right? So it's like the battery of the soul of the world. So I see that alphabet crossing the sea as the traumatized inner self beginning to find connection in the outer world, to find its way out of that inner stuckness. And one other thing about suffering that's really important here is suffering begets wisdom, you know? That's really where wisdom comes from. You can read wisdom and it's really helpful to memorize, pithy statements of the wise. They're helpful, but they're especially helpful when you're suffering. Memorizing wisdom, it really comes in handy when you really these ideas that are handed down from the wise that help us understand how to cope with these situations and find ourselves in the world. But when we're suffering, it also Branwen is this story of love in an unimaginably difficult situation. And her son, Gwern, which is Alder, he's conceived as a kind of hope for a golden age. I think this is what the whole premise of the Irish king sailing to Britain and Bran saying, yeah, you can marry my daughter, is that he's hoping to form between two islands that are just sort of inherently at odds. There's a long-standing friction going on there. We still feel it. And so they're hoping to form an alliance to create a union, and the child will cement that. And the child will then be, they offer the, when the King of Ireland, when his horses are mutilated and he leaves like what the hell? He doesn't know what's going on. So he sails away. Bran, chases him and says, listen, your children can become the king of both islands. This is one of the things he offers them. And so that's like a kind of a Renaissance figure. The Alder is the potential of a golden age. And in this case, it doesn't work. And maybe one of the clues that we see there is they build a temple to Bran. They build let's call it a church, or a template. A temple is a template of time. They build this template of time, but they hide warriors in sacks of flour who are going to come out and kill all the British after the feast. Well, flour is ground in a mill, and a millstone is a classic symbol of the precession of the equinox, right? So this is something about time that's turning, and perhaps the time was not right for a golden age, right? So things just didn't work out because the timing wasn't right. So Venus rules Taurus, so this would be the age of 1700 BC, 3400 BC to 1700 BC, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then it's also he's also the ruler of Libra. Well, that would be way back, but with Libra again, we're talking about marriage. We're talking about open enemies. And high culture, all of these themes are inherent in the story there. So that's about all I would say about that.
And I think it's
I'd really welcome people to wade through that article, and I hope to talk about it sometime because nobody's ever asked me anything about it, and I just wondered if anybody even understood it at all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
With the mystery patterns in the Owen wheel, Libra being Venus is also autumn equinox and the descent into the mystery traditions. So, and that took us into the wild heath to winter solstice and stuff. So it's got that kind of going into the other world or crossing the Irish Sea kind of idea.
Yeah.
But then we're also now in the rising, we're coming back up from the deep, and we're going to come up in the salmon weir, like Taliesin being found in the salmon weir. And so, Bridget at Imbolc being a goddess of healing implies that this is a time of wounds. You know, this is where you go for the initiations and the mystery rites, and then you're to shed off your snake skin, to be a new you. There has to be this dealing with your grief and your trauma and all those things, you know, and then that's going to happen in the cauldron with the Alder tree, opposite Broom, and so on, and Willow. And then with Willow, there's the 9 maidens, which are the inspiration goddesses, or working with the soul in the crucible of the cauldron, ready for the salmon's leap at spring equinox. You know, that is how all that Alder and Branwen and the healing of those old wounds are all part of that rebirth. And the rebirth is the salmon's leap at spring equinox. And that seems to be played out with Bridget as a goddess of healing, with Branwen as a goddess of great trauma. And then
Which is, arguably, the cauldron may be the key to the whole story, because Bran also offers the King of Ireland the cauldron of rebirth. And the cauldron is the symbol par excellence of the incarnated, which is, a kind of pre-Christian, understanding of things, that we always reincarnate, that it's, and, the soldiers that are slain are put into the cauldron and they come out, but they can't talk. They can only fight. This is a symbol of trauma coming down the pike, which we know now that trauma does, at least 3 generations, we can see trauma going through the DNA. It's like, it's not circumstantial, it's coming down the DNA, and maybe, 3 generations may be all that they've ascertained so far. But also the shield is a symbol of the persona. When a child is traumatized, and maybe anyone, when we're traumatized, we develop a persona, and the wounded inner child is submerged and caught at that point of trauma, and a shield begins to operate, called the persona. So there's 2 ways to think of the shield. One is that a child needs to be protected. Even our inner child needs to be protected. Right. We need to have the wise adult protecting us from re-traumatizing ourselves. But the other idea of the shield is that it is the false persona that can come off when we go down into the 8th house, into the underworld, facing the trauma, ideally in a therapeutic situation, so we're not caught alone there, freaking out in the turn, a therapeutic situation, going down to the trauma to help the child reframe it, and to see that it isn't entirely a stuck situation. Because what the idea is that the gods are not capricious. The wound is exactly precisely where they put the gold. But for that gold to be recovered, we must go to the wound. So this is going into the therapeutic situation to talk about the things that happened that we are so ashamed of that we can't talk about it. And those really influence us unconsciously. We find ourselves in situations where we're getting tongue-tied, or we can't talk, or we just have to run away. And if we go into and this is also, the mysteries, the psychedelic potential of using psychedelics therapeutically gives us a kind of a seat outside of our physical trauma to look at them impartially and objectively and begin to talk about them without being re-triggered by it. That's one of the benefits of proper psychedelic use. And so, you know, I think that all of these ideas of trauma, which is arguably the keystone of psychology. What is psychology? It's a way to understand our wounds, and it's techniques to help us deal with our wounds. But if we don't have spirituality on our other leg, if we're only standing on a psychological leg and we don't have spirituality, psychology can be a hamster wheel and we'll never get off. And the more it turns, the more afflicted we will feel. We will just keep uncovering more and more woundedness with no end. We'll just, you know, end up in a black traumatic hole. So spirituality is what we need in order to see that there are eternal truths of what's going on. For example, the wound is not a capricious wound. The gold is in there. We need to go into the wound to recover the gold. That's the, you know, that's the reason we got wounded, is something is in there, maybe coming from a past life. But there's wisdom in that to understand, okay, this isn't all just a capricious nightmare from the gods. There's something here that I need to look at. That wisdom
Can I
is
say
very
something?
helpful.
This is
Yeah.
wonderful. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was a therapist for a long time, but I'm not anymore. And I'm in therapy with a wonderful healer. And but what you're saying about the wound and the gold reminds me, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the late Robert Bly. He was a hero of mine. And Michael Meade is a hero of mine. And Robert Bly did some work with Grimm's tales from a Jungian or mythopoetic perspective. And one of my favorite stories of his is his interpretation of the devil's sooty brother. And it's about, I'm not going to tell the whole story here. It's about a young man who is discharged from the army. And, you know, it's about that size traumatized, right? From being in the military, et cetera, et cetera. It could be anybody who's traumatized. And he's out walking and he runs into sort of like a bridge troll. And the troll says, I could use your help to heat the cauldrons. There are 3 cauldrons down below. And they could be full of, you know, it could be a Vietnam vet. And he's, you know, he's boiling the generals or in their abuser or whatever. These are the cauldrons of, you know, he's heating and cooking and looking at what traumatized him. And so after a period of time, could be a year, could be 6 years, could be 6 lifetimes, you know, the soldier says, okay, I'm ready. I'm leaving. I'm ready. Bags of these wood chips with you. And the soldier's like, okay. And he goes, and the wood chips turn to gold. And there's the whole rest of the story has to do with what happens with the gold and, you know, self-empowerment and all that stuff. But and how this you know, it's a universal story, of course, Grimm's fairy tales, and of how he, you know, he's in the underworld, he's in therapy, he's in whatever, taking a look at his wounds, and it turns to gold on the surface, and then he has to learn how to deal with that. But anyway, thank you for letting me talk. I love this.
And we have the wounded soldiers in the story, right? There's another image you can, like soldiers, they can be reborn, but they can't speak. They're like zombies. All they can do is fight. That's a lot like trauma.
Yeah, when you think of mercenaries and you think of, how they come from the service, you think of guys or women, soldiers with severe PTSD. I mean, PTSD, in my opinion, is an overused acronym, but the soldiers with severe PTSD, if they don't heal from it, a lot of them, not all of them, some of them go back they do another tour of service, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so perhaps that could be a symbol of that.
Another image is Bran's head, right? A disembodied head is a head that doesn't know what it's feeling. It's stuck in its head, and that can be the result of trauma. How many people do we know that are just like, just speaking gibberish because they're really not tied to the heart?
Exactly.
I mean, we can all get caught in our heads in the modern world, but part of therapy, I think, is to start to pay attention to what we're feeling. So there's Bran crossing the ocean as a head, or returning as a head from the battle.
Interesting.
Again, images, not like we can like take the story on any literal level. It's just looking at the images in the story and thinking psychologically about them.
It's interesting, the image then of just the head coming out of the water with the rest of the body in the water. It's like like Excalibur rising out of the water, isn't it? And for that part of the Ogham Grove with the alder tree and the willow being the water's edge, that the self is rising after the mystery rites. It's got the heads come out of the water,
Yeah.
and there's still the salmon's leap to achieve, but it's got this rising up from the deep and breaking the water and having the sunlight on your face as well, Franklin.
She forms a bridge, so everybody can get over there and rescue Branwen, which is the heart, the soul, who's being Bran, forms a bridge so that they can go and rescue her. This is like therapy, this is forming a bridge, but helping to bring us out of trauma.
I have a quick question in regards to that. I think a lot of this relates to Annie's first question about stories about rising up. When you think about the head coming up out of the water and this time period, I wonder if there's any relationship with Bran and when the 7 soldiers that took Bran back, what time did they appear? Did they appear at spring equinox? If they're thinking too hard, but
I think that's right on. Because I really think there's like Yuri, you're the master of astronomical, mythological connections there, but
right.
The head can be the sun,
Oh yeah.
And seven allies carrying the sun. Well, 7 is the mother, and the goddess is number 6. It's the virgin number, so it's the ever fertile earth. And seven of them carry the head to 2 islands where they live out of time. It's very psychedelic. It's like they spend time with this entertaining figure, and they lose all track of time, and then suddenly realize, oh my God, we've got to get this head to the White Tower and bury it, because they've just like forgotten what they were doing. They just were lost in the timeless realm, like Rip Van Winkle or something.
Something like 87 years.
Ah, there's a clue.
What is that timeless
That's
realm?
Uranus, you know?
What does that represent? Because it's everywhere in stories, from King
'Cause-
Arthur to, you know, Brothers Grimm. What is that?
There were 7 years.
The soul.
There were 7 years listening to the birds of Rhiannon, which means they were in the summerland
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're the summer stars.
Yeah.
And then there was 80 years in South
That's
Wales.
2 Mars cycles.
Yeah. What's the island called? Can't remember, but they were in happy bliss for 80 years until one of them opened a south-facing window. So in total, they had, you know, all these soldiers with PTSD, they had 87 years in the Summerland or the other world in bliss before they realized all their traumas again, you know, and then they rush the head to London to bury it. 87 years in the dream time.
Yeah. What is the other world? Wow. Yeah. We are sharing this world with our 5 senses, with all these things we can sort of objectively share in common. And the other world is happening within, but you can also compare it to everything we experience with our 5 senses together is this objective world going on. But when we dream, what's going on there, right? That's connected to the other world. And when we have visions, you dream wide awake, and a much brighter dream than you're normally experiencing when you go to sleep. When you have a vision, you're wide awake. It's happening in the other, it's not happening in your left brain or your rational brain. It's happening in your emotional brain, the deeper limbic cortex. The pineal gland is releasing chemicals that allow this vision or this dream to emerge while you're wide awake. And it's brighter than this world. It's just, you know, hard to explain, but that's the other world. That's another aspect of it, you know. The consciousness with wings, the third eye with the mind, you know, free to travel, not connected to the 5 senses.
Brilliant. I'm going to stop us there. I'm really worried about this reception. The conversation's been brilliant, and I just hope that most of it's recorded. I'm going to stop recording now and turn off your microphones, and we'll squeeze the meditation in before we finish. Hopefully it will work. So if you just turn your microphones off.